What just happened in Kharkiv is nothing short of stunning. Ukraine didn't grind forward. They exploded through Russian lines, forcing the Kremlin's brand new 25th Army into a chaotic, humiliating retreat. Analysts are calling it one of the most dramatic breakthroughs of the war, and Russia has no idea how to stop it. Suddenly, almost overnight, the battlefield in Kharkiv has flipped in a way few military analysts imagined possible. For months, the front lines barely moved. Every day looked like the one before it. Slow clashes, artillery duels, and positional trench warfare stretching across the northeastern region of Ukraine. But then, without warning, Ukraine launched one of its most aggressive and coordinated advances of the entire year, catching Russia's 25th Army completely off guard. What began as a small tactical push to reclaim a few villages quickly transformed into a surge that shattered Russian defensive lines, exposing weaknesses that Moscow had insisted did not exist. In a matter of hours, Ukrainian units had done what analysts expected would take weeks if it could be done at all. In the early hours of the operation, Ukrainian forces unleashed a perfectly synchronized combination of drone swarms, precision artillery, electronic warfare, and armored assaults. The goal was not to strike everywhere at once, but to find the single weakest point and break through with overwhelming speed, and that is exactly what happened. Drone footage from the battlefield shows Russian vehicles scrambling to reposition, troops attempting to dig in deeper, and commanders desperately trying to understand where the main attack was coming from. But Ukraine didn't give them the luxury of time. Every time Russian forces moved to reinforce a position, another strike rained down on them. The heart of the breakthrough was a corridor less than 3 kilometers wide. Ukrainian reconnaissance units identified it as the most vulnerable part of Russia's line, a section manned by overstretched infantry with limited armor. Ukrainian artillery hammered Russian trenches for hours, softening the line, while electronic warfare units jammed Russian communications, creating confusion just as the armored vehicles rolled in. This is where the story becomes even more dramatic. The 25th Army, supposedly one of Moscow's elite new formations, was thrown into complete chaos. The 25th Army had been built up by the Kremlin as the fresh, powerful force that would stabilize Kharkiv. Russian media portrayed it as well-trained, well-equipped, and fully prepared. But when the moment of truth arrived, that image collapsed almost instantly. Ukrainian assault groups punched through their positions so quickly that some Russian units didn't even realize their flanks were gone until Ukrainian troops were firing from behind them. Eyewitness accounts from soldiers in the region described the advance as shocking in speed and precision. One Ukrainian officer said, "We moved faster than they could react." Every step forward opened another weakness. It felt like the whole line was falling apart. What made this operation even more devastating for Russia was the pace. Analysts predicted that such an advance, if successful at all, would take a week or more. Instead, Ukrainian forces achieved their breakthrough in less than 48 hours. Within 2 days, entire sections of the Russian line were forced into retreat. Even Rachel Maddow, covering the story, put it bluntly. This isn't just Ukraine pushing forward. This is Russia getting crushed in a place they felt most secure. And she wasn't exaggerating. The shockwaves of this advance spread far beyond the battlefield. Russian military bloggers, typically loyal to the Kremlin, exploded in anger. Some accused commanders of incompetence. Others blamed lack of supplies, poor leadership, or even sabotage. What none of them could deny was the scale of the collapse. As Ukrainian forces pushed deeper, they targeted Russian supply routes, ammunition depots, and command posts. Every strike widened the breach. Russian troops were forced to abandon defensive trenches, retreat through open fields, and try to regroup in positions that had already been identified by Ukrainian drones. Intercepted communications captured panicked voices of Russian soldiers shouting for reinforcements that simply never arrived. Some units reported running out of ammunition entirely. Others said they were cut off and surrounded before they even knew Ukraine had broken through the line. Ukrainian forces didn't just rely on firepower, they relied on mobility and technology. Drone operators played a critical role, guiding armored vehicles around Russian defenses and marking targets with pinpoint accuracy. Mobile artillery units constantly repositioned to avoid counterstrikes. Infantry squads moved quickly, capturing key positions that forced Russia to keep falling back. By the third day, the 25th Army, once advertised as a stabilizing force, looked more like a force in disarray. Analysts reported significant casualties, abandoned equipment, and Russian battalions withdrawing so rapidly that some left behind vital documents and communication devices. The advance didn't just expose weaknesses in Russia's military, it exposed weaknesses in Russia's narrative. Moscow had insisted that Kharkiv was secure, that reinforcements had strengthened the front, and that Ukraine lacked the capability for a major counterattack. All of those claims were shattered in a matter of hours. Behind the military drama is the human story. In newly liberated villages, Ukrainian flags were raised again. Residents emerged from basements where they had spent weeks hiding from artillery. Some cried, some hugged the soldiers. Many simply expressed relief that the fighting had finally moved away from their homes. Ukrainian troops, exhausted but motivated, spoke of momentum, something they desperately needed after months of difficult fighting. One soldier said, "This time, we aren't just holding them back, we're pushing them out." Russia, however, now faces strategic dilemmas. Do they send more troops to reinforce Kharkiv, risking vulnerabilities elsewhere? Do they attempt to counterattack, even though their lines are weakened? Or do they retreat further and try to rebuild a new defensive position? Each option comes with massive risks. What is clear is that the situation has changed dramatically and fast. Ukraine's breakthrough in Kharkiv isn't just another battlefield update. It's a moment that could reshape the war's trajectory. The rapid collapse of the 25th Army raises serious questions inside Russia, inspires renewed hope in Ukraine, and sends a clear message to the world. Ukraine is far from defeated, and the fight in Kharkiv is only the beginning of a much larger shift. The Russian 25th Army was meant to be Moscow's answer to Ukraine's renewed momentum. For months, Russian officials promoted it as the fresh, powerful formation that would stabilize the front, restore defensive strength, and halt Ukrainian advances in Kharkiv. Newly trained battalions, updated equipment, reorganized command structures, the Kremlin portrayed this army as the symbol of Russia's ability to adapt and overcome setbacks. But the reality unfolding on the battlefield is nothing like the image Moscow tried to sell. As Ukrainian forces pushed deeper into Russian-held territory, the situation inside the 25th Army began deteriorating faster than anyone anticipated. Reports from the front describe a force collapsing under pressure. Soldiers abandoned defensive trenches that had taken months to build. Units lost contact with their commanders. Entire sections of the line folded without putting up significant resistance. It became clear that the 25th Army was not prepared, not for Ukraine's speed, not for their technological advantage, and certainly not for the ferocity of the advance. Intercepted communications tell the story more vividly than any official statement. Russian troops can be heard shouting, confused, unsure of their positions, unsure of where Ukraine was attacking next. Some begged for ammunition. Others asked repeatedly for evacuation that never came. A few communications abruptly cut off, suggesting units that were overrun before they even had the chance to retreat. One Ukrainian commander described the situation in brutally simple terms. They didn't know where we were coming from. Every time they repositioned, we were already behind them. This wasn't a conventional assault. Ukraine didn't throw masses of troops into a single direction. Instead, they used mobility, intelligence, and technology to dismantle the 25th Army piece by piece. Ukrainian drone operators became the eyes of the battlefield. They hunted Russian supply trucks, artillery positions, and command posts with ruthless efficiency. Every time the Russians tried to reinforce a position, Ukrainian drones marked the convoy and unleashed precision strikes. Artillery worked in perfect coordination with drone teams. Instead of firing randomly, Ukrainian gunners targeted high-value infrastructure communication hubs, regrouping points, ammunition dumps. These strikes created chaos inside Russian ranks, cutting off support before the infantry even advanced. Meanwhile, Ukrainian infantry units moved with unprecedented speed. Instead of attacking fortified trenches head-on, they maneuvered around them, isolating Russian positions and forcing them to retreat or surrender. It was warfare built on strategy and adaptation, not brute force. By the end of the third day, the scale of the collapse became undeniable. Reports indicated that Russia's 25th Army had suffered massive casualties, with several battalions losing over half their strength. In some areas, Russian forces were pushed back nearly 12 kilometers, a retreat deeper and faster than anything Moscow had anticipated. Russian soldiers who managed to escape described complete disorganization. Some said they were ordered to hold positions with no ammunition left. Others claimed their officers fled first. There were even accounts of units refusing orders after realizing they had no backup and no realistic chance of holding the line. For the Kremlin, the political blow is far greater than the military setback. Moscow spent months promoting the 25th Army as the key to stabilizing Kharkiv. State media described it as a rejuvenated, well-equipped force. Pro-Kremlin analysts insisted it would reverse Ukraine's momentum. But now, video after video circulating online shows a very different reality. Russian troops running under fire, abandoned trenches, burnt-out vehicles, and soldiers surrendering in groups. Russian military bloggers, usually loyal, even nationalistic, are lashing out with anger and disbelief. Some accuse commanders of incompetence. Others blame logistics, corruption, or internal mismanagement. What none of them can deny is the humiliation. The 25th Army wasn't just a military asset, it was a political symbol. Its collapse directly undermines the Kremlin's narrative that Russia is in control of the war. It raises serious questions inside Russia about the competence of its military leadership and the effectiveness of its mobilization efforts. For Ukraine, the breakthrough represents more than a tactical victory. It is a morale-boosting moment, a demonstration that they can outthink and outmaneuver a larger, better-equipped enemy. Ukrainian troops on the front spoke about the operation with pride and determination. Many said it was the first time in months that they felt they had the upper hand. One Ukrainian soldier summed it up powerfully. They kept saying, "This new army would stop us," but the moment we attacked, they fell apart. The collapse of the 25th Army also has strategic implications. It forces Russia to reconsider its troop deployments across the region. Reinforcing Kharkiv means weakening other fronts. Ignoring Kharkiv means risking further breakthroughs. Either option stretches Russia's already strained resources and exposes more vulnerabilities. This victory also strengthens Ukraine's position internationally. Western officials have been watching closely, evaluating the effectiveness of the weapons and training provided. The success of this operation showcases how well-prepared, well-supported Ukrainian units can shape the battlefield. In short, the fall of the 25th Army is not just a military failure, it's a symbol of Russia's broader struggles. What was supposed to be the force that stabilized the front has instead become an example of its weaknesses. What was advertised as a fresh, powerful army has collapsed under pressure. And what the Kremlin painted as a confident, organized force has been exposed as disjointed and unprepared. This isn't just a setback. This is a humiliation, one that will echo far beyond Kharkiv and reshape the next phase of the war. What makes this advance different from every previous Ukrainian operation? One word: strategy. For nearly 2 years, the front lines in eastern Ukraine had been defined by slow, grinding assaults, small gains, heavy losses, and long, exhausting battles over just meters of ground. But this time, Ukraine broke that pattern. Instead of relying on one large offensive push, they executed a fast, decentralized, multi-pronged attack designed to overwhelm the Russian 25th Army from every direction. It was a complete shift in how Ukraine fights, and it left Russia scrambling. Ukrainian commanders abandoned the idea of pushing a single armored column into a single direction. That tactic often resulted in predictable movements that Russia could prepare for. Instead, Ukraine launched several simultaneous breakthroughs, each supported by drones, artillery, and rapid-moving infantry teams. This wasn't luck. This wasn't brute force. This was a modern, intelligence-driven assault, and it exposed every weakness in the Russian defensive system. 1. Drone swarms leading the advance. At the heart of this operation were Ukrainian drone swarms, an army in the sky. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, of FPV drones flew ahead of the troops, identifying Russian soldiers hiding in tree lines, spotting tanks under camouflage nets. and targeting supply convoys before they could reach the front. These drones didn't just provide reconnaissance, they destroyed. FPV drones targeted armored vehicles, blew up ammunition boxes, and disabled key communication antennas. Russian units reported drones hitting them from angles they didn't expect, some coming low to the ground, others dropping explosives directly into trenches. The psychological effect was enormous. Russian commanders were forced to constantly reposition their troops, trying desperately to avoid the next wave of drones. But that constant movement was exactly what Ukraine wanted. Every repositioning revealed another weakness. Every attempt to hide created new opportunities for Ukrainian artillery. The drones weren't just tools, they were the opening act of a far bigger strategy. A Ukrainian drone operator described it this way: "We weren't attacking their defenses, we were removing them before our soldiers even got there." This is what made the advance so devastating. Russian troops were already exhausted before the first Ukrainian tank even rolled in. 2. Artillery dominance through counter-battery fire. The second major tactic was artillery not in the traditional sense, but in the form of precision, counter-battery destruction. Ukraine used advanced Western-supplied radar systems that detect the exact location of Russian guns the moment they fire. This allowed Ukrainian artillery to respond instantly. In many cases, Russian batteries fired 1 or 2 rounds before being hit themselves. Entire Russian artillery units were neutralized in the first few hours of fighting. This created a nightmare scenario for Russian infantry. They suddenly found themselves exposed, unsupported, and unable to call for cover fire. Some soldiers reportedly went days without receiving a single artillery strike in their support because their guns were either destroyed or afraid to fire. The loss of artillery meant Russian infantry had to face Ukrainian armor and infantry with almost no backup. And when the armored vehicles began to push, Russian troops had no heavy firepower to stop them. One Ukrainian military analyst summed it up: "If you remove Russia's artillery, you remove half of their army's strength." Ukraine did exactly that. 3. Armored units pushing into weak points. With drones clearing the skies and artillery clearing the ground, Ukrainian armored forces launched the final phase of the breakthrough. But instead of attacking the strongest parts of the Russian line, Ukraine targeted the weakest, most poorly defended routes, logistics, roads, rear support trenches, and areas manned by under-equipped infantry. Ukrainian commanders weren't looking to smash through fortifications, they were looking to move through gaps before Russia could react. And it worked. Armored vehicles advanced rapidly, cutting through lightly defended roads, isolating Russian battalions from their supplies, and blocking escape routes. This created pockets of Russian troops who had no ammunition, no reinforcements, and no clear line of retreat. Some surrendered, some fled, some simply disappeared from the battlefield. The 25th Army wasn't beaten by one massive force, it was broken apart from the inside. Ukraine's armored units didn't need to fight every Russian soldier. They only needed to fracture the structure holding the army together. Once supply lines were cut and communication centers destroyed, the Russian units closest to the front had no coordination, no leadership, and no chance. A modern war fueled by precision, technology, and speed. This entire operation showed one thing clearly: Ukraine has adapted to modern warfare faster than Russia. The combination of FPV drones, real-time intelligence, electronic warfare, and fast-moving armored forces created a storm of pressure that the 25th Army had never trained for. This wasn't the slow, predictable warfare of yesterday. This was precision-based, data-driven combat, and Russia was left behind. And the results speak for themselves. Analysts now say this breakthrough could expand into a wider collapse, especially if Ukraine continues to intercept and destroy Russian reinforcements before they reach the front. Russia is rushing troops toward Kharkiv, but so far, Ukraine has struck many of these convoys before they even get close to the battlefield. If that continues, Russian defensive lines may continue to unravel. Rachel Maddow captured the urgency and scale of the situation in one sentence: if Ukraine keeps this pace, Russia may lose control of northern Kharkiv entirely. And for the first time in months, that possibility looks not just hopeful, but genuinely realistic. Behind every frontline map and military update is the human story, one that's unfolding rapidly, painfully, and powerfully across Kharkiv. While analysts talk about advances, counterattacks, and shifting control, the people living through it feel every moment in real time. And in this chapter of the conflict, the human side of the war is more visible than ever. For Ukrainian soldiers who have endured months of brutal trench warfare, the mood has transformed. This latest advance didn't just move the front line forward, it breathed life back into exhausted troops who had been holding defensive positions with limited ammunition, worn-out vehicles, and unpredictable support. One Ukrainian soldier summed it up perfectly, standing near a recently liberated village with mud-streaked armor behind him. "We're not just holding anymore, we're driving them out." That sentence captures the shift better than any satellite image or military report ever could. For months, Ukrainian troops had been stuck in defensive battles, absorbing wave after wave of Russian attacks, each day blurred into the next, filled with artillery fire, drone threats, and trench raids. Many soldiers described feeling like they were simply surviving, not fighting, not progressing, just surviving. But this new advance changed the psychological landscape. Suddenly, Ukrainian units were not being pushed, they were the ones pushing. They were not just protecting ground, they were taking it back. And that has inspired a level of morale that commanders say they haven't seen in a very long time. One officer described the momentum as the spark we needed. Another said, "This is what reminds us why we fight." As Ukrainian forces entered newly liberated villages, the human cost became painfully clear. Houses reduced to skeletons of burnt wood and shattered brick, streets filled with debris and broken glass, electricity lines torn down, schools destroyed, farmlands cratered by artillery strikes. And yet through this devastation, something powerful emerged: relief. Residents, many of whom had spent weeks or even months hiding in basements, slowly stepped outside into the daylight. Some carried white cloths tied to sticks, unsure of who might still be fighting nearby. Others held children who had barely seen sunlight during intense shelling periods. Their gratitude was immediate and overwhelming. People hugged the Ukrainian soldiers. Some cried openly in the streets. Others offered whatever food or water they had left. Elderly residents thanked the troops for bringing hope back. Parents whispered, almost in disbelief, "We're safe now." In many villages, the first sign of liberation was the rumble of Ukrainian armored vehicles rolling down roads that had been silent except for explosions. Soldiers waved, residents waved back. In those brief moments, the war felt less like a distant conflict and more like a deeply personal struggle for survival, dignity, and home. But while Ukraine's side of the story is filled with renewed hope, the situation for Russian troops in the region paints a much darker picture. On the Russian side, conditions are deteriorating fast. The collapse of defensive lines has created panic, exhaustion, and despair among soldiers who were promised reinforcement, support, and stability, but received none. Many of these troops were recently mobilized, poorly trained, and sent into battle with minimal preparation. Intercepted Russian communications reveal a dire situation. Soldiers begging for evacuation 5, units reporting they are completely surrounded in Expertit, commanders refusing to answer radios fresh, logistics teams admitting they have no way to deliver ammunition later, troops saying they have no idea where Ukrainian forces are advancing next out. Some Russian soldiers, according to Ukrainian intelligence, walked miles on foot to escape encirclement, only to find their routes cut off by drone strikes. Others reportedly abandoned positions outright, leaving behind weapons, equipment, and personal belongings just to avoid being overrun. One intercepted message captured the despair perfectly. "If they don't pull us out, we're done. There is no front left." Russian officers seem equally overwhelmed. With Ukrainian breakthroughs appearing suddenly across multiple sectors, commanders have struggled to issue clear orders. Some units claim their officers fled first. Others say their leadership has gone silent due to communication, jamming, or simply losing control of the battlefield. Supply officers, meanwhile, face impossible conditions. With Ukrainian drones striking roads and convoys, delivering ammunition has become extremely dangerous. Several supply trucks were destroyed before even reaching the front. As a result, Russian infantry units report running out of bullets in the middle of firefights, a scenario that often ends in retreat, surrender, or worse. For the Russian 25th Army, the unit that was supposed to stabilize Kharkiv, this is a nightmare. It was built, reorganized, and heavily promoted as the force that would halt Ukraine's momentum. Russian state media spent months portraying it as a symbol of renewed strength. But now, reality paints a very different picture. This army is not stabilizing anything. It is struggling to survive. Its battalions are depleted. Its officers are overwhelmed. Its logistics are collapsing. Its morale is in freefall. Videos circulating online show Russian troops retreating under fire, running across open fields with no cover, or hiding in destroyed buildings waiting for evacuation that never arrives. Outrage among Russian military bloggers who usually support the Kremlin's narrative has reached a breaking point. They accuse commanders of betrayal, incompetence, and hopeless planning. One prominent blogger wrote, "The 25th Army did not fail. The leadership failed the 25th Army." This collapse isn't just tactical. It's emotional, psychological, and symbolic. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops continue pushing forward, motivated by the faces of liberated civilians, the relief of holding regained ground, and the belief that this may be the start of a larger turning point. Behind every ruined building, every burned vehicle, every trench, and every liberated street is a human story of suffering, survival, and now, for the first time in a long time, hope. The war continues. The fighting is far from over. But in Kharkiv, for the first time in months, the human story on Ukraine's side is no longer just about enduring. It's about advancing. It's about reclaiming. It's about fighting back. And for the Russian 25th Army, the story has shifted from holding the line to trying desperately not to collapse any further. This advance is more than a battlefield victory. It's a strategic shift, one that military analysts have been waiting to see for months. For nearly a year, the war in northern Kharkiv had settled into a punishing, grinding stalemate. Russia fortified the region with layers of trenches, minefields, and newly deployed units, including the much-publicized 25th Army. Moscow believed these forces would freeze Ukrainian movements and allow Russia to regain the initiative. But now, almost overnight, the dynamic has changed. If Ukraine can hold and expand these newly gained positions, the entire geometry of the northern front may shift in Ukraine's favor. What began as a tactical advance is now shaping up to be a potential operational breakthrough, one that carries enormous consequences for both sides. First, there's the immediate military impact. Russia has relied heavily on its northern Kharkiv positions to stage attacks deeper into Ukrainian territory. These positions also serve as logistical arteries, connecting Russian units across the Luhansk and Kharkiv directions. If Ukraine manages to consolidate its gains, Russia's ability to launch fresh offensives from this axis could be crippled. Commanders may find themselves unable to rotate troops, resupply artillery, or reinforce exposed sectors without exposing themselves to Ukrainian fire. This creates a domino effect. A weakened Russian presence in northern Kharkiv would force Moscow into a difficult strategic choice: either commit reserves to stabilize the crumbling front or accept further Ukrainian advances and risk a wider collapse. Neither option is ideal for Russia. Reinforcing Kharkiv would require pulling troops away from other critical areas, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and the southern front, where Ukrainian forces are already pressuring Russian defenses. But doing nothing could allow Ukraine to push deeper, threatening key Russian lines and potentially forcing an even larger withdrawal. It's a lose-lose scenario for the Kremlin. Western military analysts are already pointing out that this could mark the beginning of a momentum shift one Ukraine urgently needs after months of limited progress. The combination of improved drone warfare, precision artillery, and decentralized offensive tactics is proving not only effective, but game-changing. This breakthrough demonstrates that Ukrainian forces are still capable of shaping the battlefield, not merely responding to Russian pressure. Politically, the implications inside Russia are severe. The 25th Army was supposed to be proof that Moscow could field fresh, modernized formations despite staggering losses elsewhere. Russian state media spent months celebrating its creation, portraying it as the backbone of a renewed Russian advance. But its performance under real combat pressure has raised uncomfortable questions. How did an elite force collapse so quickly? Why were its units caught unprepared? Why are supply lines still failing after nearly 3 years of war? And perhaps the most damaging question, how did Ukraine outmaneuver a force that Russia insisted was superior? These aren't questions the Kremlin wants circulating. Yet Russian military bloggers, some of Moscow's own loudest pro-war voices, are openly furious. They're sharing videos of disorderly retreats, broken equipment, and abandoned positions. They're accusing commanders of lying, logistics officers of corruption, and the Ministry of Defense of covering up the reality on the ground. For a government that relies on tightly managed narratives, this is a serious problem. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, the breakthrough is generating a different kind of pressure, positive pressure. Ukraine's leadership can now point to tangible, visible results from Western military support. Every drone strike, every artillery shell, every armored vehicle contributed to this advance. It's a powerful message to Ukraine's allies. The support is working. The weapons matter. And Ukraine can win ground, not just defend it when properly supplied. This success strengthens Kyiv's argument for continued assistance, especially in areas where Ukraine still needs help. Drone production, electronic warfare systems, air defense, artillery ammunition, and long-range strike capabilities. The breakthrough in Kharkiv proves that when Ukraine is equipped, it can outfight and outthink a much larger adversary. And that's exactly the point Rachel Maddow highlighted when she addressed this development. This is Ukraine reminding the world that they are far from defeated and that Russia's so-called new army may not be as strong as advertised. Her words resonate because they capture the deeper narrative unfolding on the ground. This isn't just about a few kilometers gained or a handful of villages liberated. It's about momentum, perception, and the ability to dictate the pace of the conflict. For months, Russia tried to show that it was reclaiming the initiative. It launched attacks in multiple directions, pushed aggressively around Chasiv Yar, and attempted to pressure Ukraine into retreat. The Kremlin hoped to convince the world that time was on Russia's side. But this breakthrough in Kharkiv challenges that assumption. It shows that Ukraine still has the operational capability to surprise Russia, to break through fortified lines, and to force elite Russian units into chaotic retreat. It proves that the war is far from predetermined and that Russian confidence is far from unshakable. And perhaps most importantly, it shows that the psychological balance is shifting. Russian soldiers on the front are watching videos of Ukrainian breakthroughs. They're hearing stories of units being encircled or cut off. They're seeing their elite formations fail. Morale matters in war. And right now, Ukrainian morale is surging while Russian morale is cracking. Ukraine's breakthrough is not the end of the story. If anything, it's the beginning of something larger. Military experts believe that if Ukraine can maintain the pace, disrupt reinforcements, secure newly liberated areas, and continue targeting Russian supply lines, the operation could expand into a far broader collapse across northern Kharkiv. And that's why the world is watching so closely. Because what happens here on this front, in these liberated villages, against this supposedly elite Russian army, may shape the next phase of the entire war. And the shockwaves from Kharkiv are only just beginning. If you want to stay ahead of every major update from the front lines, make sure you hit like, tap subscribe, and turn on the bell. This story is far from over, and we'll be breaking down every new development right here.